The wedding had ended only a week ago, yet the warmth and joy that once wrapped around Diep like a soft blanket had begun to fade. When she first stepped into the grand house of James's family, she carried nothing but hope. Hope that love would soften the disapproval she had sensed before, hope that marriage would convince them she belonged. But reality arrived quickly, crushing and cold. On the first morning, Diep woke early to help prepare breakfast, eager to show respect to the family she had just joined. She tiptoed down the stairs with a gentle smile, only to hear the sharp voice of James's mother cutting through the quiet kitchen. "So the new bride finally wakes up," the woman said, without looking at her. "I thought girls from your background sleep until noon." The words stung, but Diep forced herself to bow politely. "Mother, I just wanted to help." "You can't help. You just stay out of the way." Diep froze. She had never been spoken to like that. Her cheeks burned, but she backed away silently. It was the first scratch on her heart, small but deep. Later that day, James's father walked past her in the living room. His eyes barely acknowledged her presence, yet his voice was loud enough to echo through the hall. "A CEO marrying a girl like her? What a disgrace!" The servants shifted uncomfortably. Diep lowered her head, trying to swallow the pain. She told herself it was only the beginning. They needed time to accept her. She was willing to wait, to be patient, to prove her worth. But the whispers continued. Whenever she passed through the halls, conversations fell silent, only to resume once she was out of sight. She became the shadow in her own home, present yet unwanted. Still, she kept smiling for James. Whenever he held her hand, the sadness inside her briefly loosened. She didn't want him to worry, not now when his company was still recovering from the chaos John had caused. She didn't want to burden him more than he already was. But every night, when she laid her head on the pillow, Diep's chest tightened. The home she dreamed of building with James felt more like a battlefield. And she wondered, just for a moment, if the people meant to welcome her were the ones hurting her the most. How long could she endure it?
James noticed the change in Diep long before she found the courage to admit it. She still greeted him with the same gentle smile each evening, still placed warm meals on the table, still tried to lighten his worries with soft laughter. But her eyes, those bright, hopeful eyes he loved so dearly, seemed dimmer each day, like stars fading behind gathering clouds. One night, when he arrived home later than usual after meeting with investors, he found her sitting alone on the balcony. Her knees were drawn close to her chest, her arms wrapped around them for warmth. The breeze was cold, but she hadn't even bothered to bring a shawl. She stared into the darkness as though it held all her unanswered questions. "Diep?" James stepped closer, concern threading his voice. "Why are you out here? It's freezing." She startled slightly, wiping her cheek quickly, but he had already seen the glimmer of tears. "I'm fine," she whispered. He knelt in front of her, lifting her chin gently. "You're not. Tell me what's wrong." Her lips trembled. She wanted to say everything, how his mother belittled her, how his father treated her like she didn't exist, how she felt like a stranger in her own home. But the words stuck in her throat. She didn't want James to feel torn between his family and his wife. She didn't want him to suffer because of her. "I just miss the farm a little," she finally said, forcing a small smile. "The simple days, the quiet." James didn't believe her, but he didn't push further. Instead, he cupped her hands, warming them with his own. "If you're unhappy here, we'll find a solution. You're not alone, Diep." The sincerity in his voice made her eyes sting again. She shook her head. "No, I don't want to make things harder for you. Your parents need you, the company needs you. I can endure a little discomfort. But discomfort was an understatement. The next morning, the storm grew harsher. James had barely stepped out for work when his mother cornered Diep near the kitchen. "You think you can trap my son with your sweet face and fake politeness?" she hissed. "Let me tell you something. Women from families like yours don't belong here." Diep stiffened, shocked by the venom in the woman's tone. I never wanted to trap anyone. Save your lies. The sooner you walk out of this house, the better for all of us." Those words pierced straight through Diep's heart, and this time she couldn't hide the pain. When James returned home that evening, he found the servants whispering nervously. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Something had happened. Something big. The moment he realized Diep wasn't in the house, a horrible chill ran down his spine. "Where is my wife?" he demanded. No one dared to answer, but one thing was certain. James's family had crossed a line, and he was about to find out just how far they had gone. After that night in the garden, something inside Diep hardened. She still trembled whenever she recalled the cold pressure of Caroline's finger under her chin, or the quiet warning laced behind her smile. But she also discovered a new kind of courage, a courage born not from confidence, but from love. She no longer thought only of herself. She thought of James, of how his shoulders had seemed heavier each day, of how he carried the weight of a company, a broken family legacy, and now the growing storm brewing inside his own home. Diep refused to let herself become another burden. But the difficulties were far from over. Caroline began her campaign quietly at first. A misplaced item here, a sharp whispered accusation there. One morning, Diep found the entire dining hall filled with extended relatives gathered unannounced. Faces she had never seen sat around the long mahogany table, and every one of them paused to stare at her as she stepped inside. James immediately stood up, chair scraping across the floor, his protective instinct kicking in even before Diep understood what was happening. But his aunt, a stern woman with silver hair twisted into an immaculate bun, raised her voice first. "So this is the girl," she said, lifting her chin, "the one who charmed our James." Diep felt her cheeks burn. The words were not kind. They were edged with something sharp, as if Diep were a stain on their carefully polished walls. Caroline made a show of sighing dramatically. "She is still adjusting," she told them, as if Diep were a stray cat learning how to behave indoors. James shot Caroline a warning glare, but his aunt continued. "A wife of this family has duties, reputation, discipline. Does she even understand what she has married into?" Diep wished the floor would open beneath her. She tried to speak, but her voice tangled in her throat. James stepped forward and took her hand. "She understands more than anyone here," he said firmly. "She understands loyalty, something this family seems to have forgotten." His words sliced through the room like a blade. Several relatives exchanged shocked whispers. Caroline's smile thinned. The tension became suffocating, and Diep nearly wilted from the weight of so many judging eyes. But for the first time, she understood something important. James would fight for her, but he alone could not shield her from everything. This was not only his battle, it was slowly becoming hers as well. And the storm was only beginning to rise. The storm arrived sooner than Diep expected. It began with whispers, small, poisonous, impossible to trace. Servants who once greeted her kindly now avoided her eyes. A distant cousin hinted that Diep had married James for money. Another relative suggested she had bewitched him. Diep tried to ignore them, but each comment chipped away at her confidence, leaving bruises no one could see.
Caroline was the architect behind the scenes. She never attacked Diep directly. Instead, she planted seeds. A gentle remark here, a sigh there, all delivered with the sweetness of someone pretending to help. "People talk," Caroline murmured one afternoon as she passed Diep in the hallway. "It's best not to embarrass James further." The words slipped into Diep's chest like a thin knife. Diep wanted to be strong. She told herself the insults didn't matter. But even the bravest heart can fracture under constant pressure. One night, she sat alone on the balcony, staring at the distant city lights, wondering if she truly belonged anywhere in this enormous house. The wind felt colder than usual, as if even the air knew she was unwelcome. James found her there. His hair was tousled, his tie loosened, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Yet the moment he saw the redness around her eyes, all of his fatigue hardened into something sharper, anger and guilt intertwined. "Diep," he whispered, sitting beside her. "What happened?" At first, she said nothing. She didn't want to add to his burdens. He was dealing with the company crisis, financial pressure, the fallout from John's schemes. So she forced a smile. "I'm fine," she lied. James cupped her face gently, refusing to accept her answer. "I can't protect you if you hide the truth from me." Those words undid her. Tears slipped past her defenses, spilling down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but the emotions tangled until she could only whisper, "Maybe I'm not enough for your family." James pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "You are more than enough. They are the ones who are blind." He felt her small frame trembling, and something inside him snapped. Quietly, with a voice edged in a promise of war, he said, "I won't let them hurt you again, not even for a moment." But Caroline was already planning her most ruthless move yet, one that would force James to choose between his family's legacy and the woman he loved.
In the quiet aftermath of everything that happened, one lesson stood out clearly. Love is not truly tested during moments of peace, but during storms that try to destroy it. Diep entered James's wealthy and complicated world with nothing but sincerity, and yet she faced hostility, jealousy, and cruelty from those who feared losing their sense of power. Her pain revealed an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the greatest wounds come from the very people who should protect us. But from that pain came understanding. Diep learned that self-worth does not come from anyone's approval, not even from a powerful family with old traditions and heavy expectations. True strength is the ability to remain gentle even when treated harshly, to keep one's heart steady even when surrounded by noise. Her courage was not loud, it was quiet, persistent, and deeply human. James, on the other hand, learned what it truly means to love someone. Loving Diep was not just about flowers, promises, or warm moments under soft light. It was about standing beside her when the world turned cold. It was about recognizing his responsibility, not only as a husband, but as a man to shield the person he loved from injustice, even when the enemy came from within his own bloodline. And for both of them, one truth became unshakable. Marriage is not just two people joining hands, but two people learning to fight toward the same future. Loyalty is not proven by grand gestures, but by the everyday act of choosing each other despite fear, pressure, and conflict. The greatest lesson of all is this: no one has the right to crush another's spirit, and no love can survive if one heart stands alone. Diep and James discovered that protection, respect, and empathy are not luxuries in a relationship. They are foundations. Without them, even the strongest love can crumble. With them, even the fiercest storms can be survived. Their journey reminds us that love is not something we find. It is something we build, protect, and fight for, side by side.